In this video, I'm going to help you learn how to use SQL Server Management Studio. SQL Server Management Studio is a tool that comes with SQL Server. It used to actually come with it. Now you have to download it separately, but it's a free tool. And I'm on the screen here. And you simply have to download it and install it. And if you need any help with that, I do have a video and I'll link it up below this video here. And you just have to install it, but you also need a place to connect it to. So the Management Studio is only a shell. It's only a place to write SQL. And it sends those SQL commands to the server. And so you also need a server to connect it to. And if you don't have one that you can connect to, you can install a local one. And the local one you actually install is SQL Server Developer Edition. And I have a video for that one too, but I'm just showing you here that you can download the Developer Edition and install it. Then you'll have a server to talk to. So if you want to follow along and do any of these practice things that I'm doing, you have to connect to a server in order to be able to do them. And I have a video for that. Now that we have SQL Server Management Studio opened up, we have to connect to something. So the screen you get when you first open this up, it has a connect to server already ready to go, but you may or may not have a server name in it. And so you have to figure out what server you want to connect to. In this case, if you don't have anything in this list, you can click Browse for More, and it should find all the servers that are local to your machine. But if you're connecting out to another SQL server, like for work or something like that, you'll have to type in the server address, the server name, or the server IP address or something. If you click on this network servers and you're at work, it may take a little while to start searching throughout the whole network to try to find servers. But when you're looking at your local servers, it's pretty fast. In this case, I just want to connect to the actual relational database, and I see it in the list. And so yours may have a different name, because this is my computer name, and it may be your computer name. And you click on it, you hit OK. And now there's some other options that we can go through in a little bit, but right now that's enough. You should be able to just go in and hit connect. And as soon as you do that, this little area on the left-hand side comes up, and it's called the Object Explorer. The Object Explorer is where you actually look at your server and look at all the objects in the server. And so in this case, we're looking at we're looking at Joey Desktop and SQL Server version 15.0.412.102.2. The next thing to note is that you can drill down into some of these other areas. But before we do that, I want to work a little bit more on connections and make sure we have a good feeling for what these things are. So when you're connecting, once you're connected, you can also connect to more SQL servers. So I'm going to connect to one called localhost. And now I've got multiple SQL servers, so you can have multiple open at the same time. You can also disconnect them. And you can disconnect by clicking this disconnect button here. Or you can right click on the server itself and hit disconnect. And now I have no servers. Now I'm back to a blank place. And let's go back and connect. And you can connect using this drop down menu and pick what type of connection you want. Let's do the database connection again. And I'm going to connect back. And now we're back and we're connected again. Or the other thing you can do is click on this Connect Object Explorer, and then you can pick what type you want in the drop-down list. And so I want to actually connect to an analysis services, and I've got one here, so I'll connect to that. And the first thing you notice is when you connect to a different type of object or different type of server, you get a different icon here. And so at a glance you can tell what type of server you're connected to. This little black icon that looks more like a cylinder, that's your database, your relational database. If it looks like a cube, it's your multi-dimensional analysis services. I can connect to another analysis services because I've got two different types on my machine. And this one has a different icon also. And this is a tabular instance of analysis services. And so it has more of a kind of an Excel grid icon. And then there's two more types we can connect to that I have. Integration services. It has a different little icon if you want to connect to it. And then we have reporting services, and it has a different icon also. Now beyond the icon, they also have different options. Like there's databases, and they're going to look different because they're not tables. I don't have any in here actually. Again, databases and management, running packages and stored packages, job security, shared schedules. Now we're not going to actually look at the objects in here. The main thing I want you to know is you can connect to different types of SQL Server items. And when you do, they have different icons on them. So let's go ahead and do the disconnect and get rid of those. And let's expand out our relational database. The Object Explorer is where you actually look at your server and look at all the objects in the server. You can right click on the server itself, and you can go to properties, and you get more information about it. And like you can see the operating system, I'm running Windows 10 Pro here. And then another big one to notice is server collation. The main thing about that is it case sensitive, which means you have to actually type things uppercase and lowercase correctly in order to get matches when you write in SQL? Or is it case insensitive, where it doesn't matter if you uppercase or lowercase things? And so that's an interesting property there. And then you have other server properties that are more DBA type of things, and how much memory you want to use, how many processors, some different security settings, connections, database settings, advanced, and permissions. So underneath the server level of the Object Explorer, you can get to the server properties. Now, many times if you're working with a SQL Server for work, you won't have permissions to make these changes unless you're a DBA. They'll keep you locked down to just being able to work with your database. I'm going to cancel all that. Now there's different things you can do inside of that database or inside that server. Inside the server, you have databases, security, server objects, replication, polybase. Some of those might not be there depending on what you have installed. Always on, high availability. I don't remember the last time I've used those. If you're a DBA and you're working in a big company with all kinds of different SQL servers, you may end up using those. For the most part, you won't use those. Management. That's more DBA type of stuff too. I've been in those a little more, but that's more DBA. And then integration services catalogs, I'm actually in those quite a bit because I do a lot of ETL work, a lot of integration work. And then you have the SQL Server agent. This is where scheduled jobs happen within SQL Server. And you can see there's job stuff there. And then let's go back up now. And let's look at databases. So databases is where you'll be at most of the time. Inside the databases, you're going to have the list of all the databases that are available. Depending on your security, you may or may not be able to get into all of them. But from here, if you know what database you're wanting to go after, you would click on that. And so in this case, I'm going to go to SQL Training Online Simple DB. And what you want to do from there is you want to actually create a query window. The query window is going to give you an opportunity to write SQL. So far, all we've done is browse, what's going on in the server, what things are there. But now we want to go and actually create a new query. So I'll click that. And now we have our query window. Some things to notice about whenever you have a query window open is that at the bottom you have different things going on here. First, it says what you're connected to. And so we're connected to Joey Desktop. Then it says what database context you're in. Now it says it down here, but you actually change that up here. So when you're writing a SQL statement, let me click that down, you want to know what database you're in, especially if you're updating things or creating tables or whatever. You need to know what context you're in. So in this case, we're on SQL Train Online Simple DB. If I come back, that's what it says at the bottom down here. Now if I change to cells, the bottom changes down here. If I change back to SQL Training Online Simple DB, then it changes down here. Now two more things. When we actually execute a query, we're going to have the time it took to run the query, and then we're going to have the count of how many rows come back. So the bottom of this gives you some indicator about what's going on this query window. So let's go ahead and write a query. So I'm going to write a pretty simple one. I'm going to say select star from employee. It's about as small of a query as you can write. Now in order to execute a query in Management Studio, there's this button up here that says execute. And so I'm going to click that, and what it did when I clicked it is it took this string that says select star from employee, it sent it to our server, the server that's Joey's desktop in this case, and then it went to the database that's in our database context, SQL Training Online Simple DB, and it executed this select statement. It got some results, and the results that it sent back to us, it displayed in this grid at the bottom. And so whenever you write the SQL statement, you execute it and you get the results at the bottom. Now you don't just get results though. There's two tabs down here. We also get messages. And so the message says 14 rows affected. It gives me a completion time. But if something went wrong and it gave us an error message, it would come back in the messages tab. Most of the time you're going to look at results, but as soon as you write something bad, so if I said employee 2 and there's not an employee 2 table and I execute this, now all I get is the messages tab at the bottom. I don't get the results tab. And the message says invalid object name, employee 2, because there's not that object. So let me go back and execute again. Now, as you start to work within Management Studio, you're going to not want to move your mouse back and forth all the time. You're going to be typing and you're going to want to execute. So if I hover over this execute, you're going to see that there is F5 in parentheses. And that means that if you hit F5, you'll get an execution on the results. And so if I come in here and hit F5, it will execute those results. Now in the query window, you can also have multiple queries. So I can say select star from department. And as I'm typing, Management Studio gives you a little help statement at the bottom. And it says, oh, we have a department table that matches DEPA. And so you can click on it. If I double click, it finishes my sentence department. Or I can start typing, and when it shows up, I can hit the down arrow to what I want, down and up arrows. And then once I'm on the one I want, I hit tab and it completes it for us. And so that's how you complete things when it's helping you out. Sometimes it won't show up and you might have to type DBO, the schema name first and then a dot. Then you're going to get all your objects that shows up with that. And now I can just tab down through my objects, or not tab, sorry. You can arrow down through your objects to what you want. And if I want department, then I hit tab and it completes that for me. Now what happens if I have two queries on the same query window? Well, Management Studio will run both of them. And so if I hit execute, you get two result sets at the bottom. One for the first query, one for the second query. Now, what if I had something in here where I was trying to say update? I was trying to say update employee and I want to set a value or something. Because a lot of times you'll be working on multiple statements and you only want to run one statement, you don't want to run the whole thing right now. Well, what you can do is you can take your cursor and hold your mouse button down and highlight the whole line, and then you can execute, and it'll only run that one line, whatever you've highlighted. Now I know this is different from other editors, so that's why I'm kind of telling you. Other editors, you'll hit Control Enter, or you need semicolons and stuff. In Management Studio, you highlight what you want to run, and then you execute it. Now I'm going to stop clicking this execute button. I'm going to start hitting F5 every time I execute. So like if I highlight it, I can hit F5 and I execute it again. So you can have multiple statements and you can highlight them. You can also highlight multiple statements and run them and execute them. I did that with F5. And I can highlight just one and execute them and I get one. So that's how you execute things within the query editor. There are some interesting things that that you should also note. Remember I talked about the bottom bar? Well, so we just executed this, and I'll do it one more time, the department table. And we know there's 4 rows here. But if you look at the bottom bar, there's also 4 rows. It tells you how many rows. Now right now we can visually inspect, but when you get to like 10,000 rows, it will just keep, it'll keep going on here. You won't be able to see how many rows, but at the bottom it will tell you. And it also executing so fast you don't get a time limit. So let me navigate to a different database and see if we can find some more rows to make that make more sense. I have this query window. I can open a second query window. If I go to this Object Explorer again, I can click on a different database like AdventureWorks DW 2017, and I can go up to the top and hit New Query, and now I've got another window open. So you can have multiple tabs open at the same time, and you can click back and forth between them. So AdventureWorks DW 2017, let's see what tables we can select from here. And it's not giving me any help at this point. And I could guess DBO dot. Oh, and it did give me some stuff, so that guess worked. But there's a better way. So we can go back to the Object Explorer and we can actually expand out all of our database, and it gives us other options here. It shows us the different objects in there. So we have tables, and now we can see all the tables. We could look at all the views. We could go into programmability and look at all the stored procedures, which I guess they don't have any in this database. And if there were functions, we could look at all the functions. In this case, I just want to look at tables because I want to get a big table here. And let's just see how big this internet sales is. So now I can take it and I can just drag it on to the right side here, and it'll pull everything over for me. And so let's highlight that, F5, and select it. So now we got more records than are on screen. And you can see that we're connected to AdventureWorks DW 2017. It took a second to run this query. But here you can see the count. There was 60,000 records, 60,398 rows. And so that's at the bottom there. So now that we've written some queries and we've looked at the query editor portion of this, let's move back over to the Object Explorer and go deeper. There's a lot more you can do in this Object Explorer. It's actually pretty powerful. And the first thing I want to do is show you how you can script things out. So this is used all of the time. And so if I go into one of these tables and I want to modify the table, or I want to just look at how it's built, I can right click on it and I can go to this spot here that says script table as, and I can say script table as create, and then you can put it into different places. into a new query editor window, and you can make it go into a file, or you can just make it go into your clipboard. This first time here, let's go to a new query window, because that's what I usually do. So I'm scripting the table as a create to a new query window. I click on that. It takes a minute, but it actually generated the create table statement. So let me scroll out a little bit, make this smaller. And I don't need certain parts of it. And there's a bunch of stuff in here. I actually don't want any of this extra stuff. But I do have a create table statement here with all the different columns, with the different types, with the identity, whether or not they can be nulled, all that stuff. And so you can script these out. A lot of times you won't do it necessarily with a table, but let's go see if there's some views over here. And so you may want to modify this employee department view. So if you're tasked with modifying this view, well, the first thing you need to do is actually know what's in the view. So you script the view, and now we have different options. We can script it as a create, or we can go ahead and script it as an alter, or we can do a create or alter, or you can drop it and actually recreate it. And so what I want to do is an alter. And I'll say, this time I'm going to say to the clipboard instead of to a new query window. Now if you do it to a clipboard, now it's like I did a Control-C. So it's sitting there ready to paste in. So I can just come in and do a Control-V, and now we have that thing scripted out. And let me get rid of some of this extra information. And now if I wanted to add a column, I could come into this and simply add the column. These squiggly lines mean that the query editor doesn't understand these objects. Well, what did I do? Let's double check this, because we already know enough to troubleshoot this. If I go down to the bottom of the screen, it says I'm connected to the VentureWorks DW 2017. Well, what database am I in right now? Let's scroll up here. I went to the VentureWorks 2017, not the VentureWorks DW 2017. So my context is off. And so it thinks that I'm in the DW. It doesn't have this human resources v employee department view to alter. Also, it probably doesn't have these tables in it. So it's really confused right now. In order to get rid of the confusion, what we need to do is click back in the query editor window, change it to the right database. So we gotta get the right database context. So I'm gonna click and switch to VentureWorks 2017. And now most of the squiggly lines disappeared. But we still have two squiggly lines. And so this is one of the tricks that we have to do, is there's a caching component of all the objects that Management Studio has. Now up here in these this edit toolbar menu, if you go down to the thing called Intellisense, there is a refresh local cache. And this refresh local cache will actually update that cache of things. So let me click that and see if it gets any better. So now we still have a squiggly line in here. And the reason we have a squiggly line is because I typed in a comma. Let me get rid of that and see if that clears it up. Now the squiggly lines are gone. So pay attention to those squiggly lines. They usually mean something's wrong. And so that's another way that Management Studio proactively helps you out. Now if I want to go ahead and finish this alter that I was doing, I can go in and add another column from any of these tables. And let's go with the E table, dot, and let's get birth date. So if I execute this, I have updated the view, which is great. That's what they wanted me to do. They wanted the birth date in there. I scripted it out, I updated it, and I altered it. Now, a lot of times, if you're working in a big database, you don't just want to alter things and then leave them. You have to save the source, or you have to deploy the source to production. You have to work in development, stuff like that. So what I want to show you now is you can save your scripts. And so right now, this script says SQL Query 2 has a little star up here. This star means it hasn't been saved. Both of them have the star. And so what I want to do is I want to go to File, and I want to actually save the query. And then let's give it a name. Alter Human Resources Department View. And I'll save the script out. And now I have it saved. And so you can close your script. And then if you want it back open, you come back in and you can open it from the location. You can go to Recent Files and click on it, and now it's back open. But look what happened when I reopened it. Again, it switched database context on me. Now if you look at the bottom, SQL Train Online Simple DB is what it says. You have to switch it back to whatever database you really should be in. In this case, we'll be in VentureWorks 2017. And now all the squiggly lines went away. We closed and we opened the file. And now that we've saved a file, we can also take, and if we're ever working on two files at the same time, you can bring one down by dragging on, and you see this thing that pops up in the middle of the screen? You can drag it. If you're in the middle, like right here, it'll go back up to the top. Or you can take it and drag it and dock it to one of the sides. So now I'm over this right hand side. Now I have these two side by side. And so you can work on two files if you need to scroll through one and reference the other one. And so I do that quite often too. Now let me redock it back. So now I have my tabs again. The next thing I want to show you is over here in the Object Explorer. If you're on a table, you can actually right click and you can select the top 1000 rows. So you don't even have to write SQL. You just select the top 1000 rows and it shows that to you. Now, there's also more help over here. If you right click, you can actually edit the top 200 rows. And this allows you to just interactively edit. Most of the time in a production environment, you won't be doing this. But when you're doing development, there may be things where you want to actually go in and change something. Like if I took this research and development group name and I put a 1 on it, and I hit enter, I actually updated that record. And I can come back here, take it off, and now it's gone. You can also come up here on the toolbar, and there's this SQL pane, and it says Show SQL Pane. If I click that, it runs a query. So if you ever needed to just interactively edit a couple records, you could come in here and do a where clause and say where name like, and I'll just get everything that starts with an %. Now you can't execute it right here, it's all grayed out. And so when you're in this view, it's a different type of view. You have to execute with this other little button over here. And it's not F5, it says Control R. So I'm just gonna hit that. And so it narrowed down, and now I can still edit. And so I could click the type of 1 on there, and I just updated that record. And so I'm gonna go back in and put it back to where it was. And so you have that screen where you can interactively update records. You can also insert records right here. And you can right click on a full row and you can do a delete. And so you have full capabilities of editing stuff if you need to. Like I said, normally in a normal production environment, you wouldn't do this. Okay, I'm gonna close that window. And let's see what other options we have when we right click. So we have a new table, so you can interactively click on new table, and this is gonna look more like Microsoft Access, and we could create a new table. We could say employee, we call that a varchar 50, and we just have a 1 column table. One thing when you're in this view, is we need to introduce another thing that you're not seeing right now. So I'm going to come over here to the View menu, and I'm going to go down to the Properties window, which is F4. So you can hit F4 and get there, or you can just come this way. And in the Properties window, we have some properties about this table we're creating. One of the properties is this schema. And so I could sit here and change the schema. There's human resources, person, production. I'm going to leave it on DVO, but that's where that shows up. And I can also go ahead and change the name here, and I can call it employee test. And now if I hit save, it's saved as employee test. When you're over here in the Object Explorer and you're creating items, sometimes they won't show up. In order to get them to show up, you have to go to the level one up. So right now I'm down in the tables. If I go up to that folder, I can do two things. I can right click and hit refresh, or there's also this little refresh button up here, and I can click it. And now it refreshed the tables that are in there, and now we see employee test in there. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. We can also right click and just simply do a delete like this. Now when we do a delete, I can just hit OK and it'll do the delete for me. Or you can actually make it write the script to do the delete so that you can run the script. And so I can go ahead and hit this script button, and it went out to a new window, cancel out of this one, and now I've got a script that does it for me. This is exactly what it was going to run for you, and now you can execute it. So if I execute this statement, it completed. So this employee test table should be gone. But again, I got to go up here, hit the little refresh button, and employee test is gone. And so these are all the ways you navigate and work around in Object Explorer. Let's look and see what else we've got. I right click, we did the design, we got the select top 100 or 1000, we got edit. We can script table. Another very useful piece of this is scripting the table as a select or an insert. If you're creating an insert, you do that to a new window. Now you have your insert statement. Now with this insert statement, it's already crafted up for you. You have all the columns listed, but you have to come in here and actually put in the different parameters of what you want here. So you'd have to actually put in the time, the error time, the username, error number, get rid of these things with those caret brackets, and then you could execute it and it would work. Another nifty thing is if you're doing a select star from, let's say this let's do the human resources dot employee. If you're doing that, but you actually want to list out the columns because you're going to get rid of a couple, what you can do is go into the human resources employee table, and you can actually click on the columns and drag it on. Now you have a comma list of all of the columns, and then you can get rid of a couple. And then you can hit F5 and execute it, and now we've selected from it. So those are more of the navigational pieces. Let's go ahead and right click some more and see what else we've got. So let's see what the view dependencies does. So objects that depend on department. So now we don't want to drop department, because if we drop like a department table, we know that we have a couple views here. So this is very nice and let you understand what things depend on this table. And so that's a nice thing to do. So let's cancel out of this. Let's right click and keep going down the list. The memory optimization advisor, I don't really use. Encrypt the columns, only if you want to encrypt it. We can create partitions. Most of this stuff are not going to be used much. Renaming may happen. Usually you're going to create a script. Delete, we've done that one. Refresh, and properties. If I click properties, it opens a window up show you some of the properties of the table. Let's go into views and see what different items we have. So if I go to the employee, we have a lot of the same stuff. We can do a new view, but we can also design. What happens if we design this view? Now we get something that looks a little more like Microsoft Access. And so we have the SQL in here, but we also have all these point and click things. And if this is a way that you work, you can try to use this view. Most of the time I write SQL, but it's here just in case, and it shows you all the joins, and it shows you, the primary key and the foreign key relationships and all that. Okay, let's close that down. And so we have the design. Again, you can select top 1000, edit top 200, script the view, same stuff. View dependencies. Let's see what is different here. So nothing depends on this view, but this view depends on other objects. And it should depend on some tables here. So here's all the tables that it joins and it depends on. So now you can see all the different dependencies, and then we can walk down those. All right, let's cancel out that. Policies, facets, rename, delete, refresh, properties. Okay, so that's the views. And the other section I want to look at is the stored procedures. So let's go into programmability, store procedures, and let's right click and see what we got here. So what we can do here, we can create a new stored procedure, but you can do that by just saying a new query window and starting to write your procedure. But what's interesting is the modify. Let's click that. The modify basically scripted it out as an alter procedure. And so let me close that and show you what I mean. So if I go in, right click again, and I script the stored procedure as an alter to a new query window, it looks the same. And so there's that stored procedure. Now we can also script the drop and create, but there's an extra one down here, execute. So let's do that, script it to a new query window. And so now it gives us a special statement that declares all these things and then executes the stored procedure. Okay, let's get out of there. And we have a dependency thing again. And we have some of the similar items. And so that's the stored procedures. Now the functions should be similar. So we have a function here. Let's right click. You can create new inline table functions and multi-statement table functions, but you can modify and script them. So everywhere you go, you can script things out, and that's really important and really helpful when you're using Management Studio. Let's go ahead and modify. A lot of times I'll hit that modifier or I'll hit that script just to see what's in the thing. And so you can interrogate what is going on in this procedure. You have the same thing on scalar value functions. And I don't know, well, those are system functions. And those are the main objects that you're going to be modifying and stuff. But we really need to also get into security and show you that. So inside the security, there's two different security areas. There's one inside a database and there's one at the server level. This one, we're inside of a database. So now everything in here is talking about what people can see inside of this database. And so if we look at users, we got DBO and we guess and all these things, because I don't have a bunch of users in here. But in a normal database, you would see a bunch of users here, or you would see a bunch of roles that people have access to. And we have different roles in here, and these are canned roles: DB owner, DB data reader, DB data writer, and some of those are used a little more often. You have schemas, you have some other stuff in here, but the users and the roles are the main things that you would use. Now, since we're talking about security, let's go back outside of the database area and let's look at the security folder that's at the server level. The main concern here is authenticating a person. So can a person even log into the server? Do we know who this person is? And so this is the top level of security. Once they get in the server, the next level is, can they get to the database? So that's why this folder is separated out. You can see me in here, and you can right click on all these things just like you could. You can script the logins and do everything. So right clicking is big, but you can also go to properties and you can see me. You can see my server roles. So this is at the server level. If you're a sysadmin at the server level, which you can see it's checkmarked, I am, then you can get to all the databases and do everything you want to do. There's also user mappings. Now we're actually looking at the area that's inside the database, the customer database. And inside the customer database, I have a DB owner role. If I go to the movie lens, I have a DB owner role. And so this is telling you exactly what's going on inside the database. There's a lot more to security that you can get into, but this is how you see it on the SQL Server Management Studio. Okay, let's get out of that. This is server roles, and again, I'm sysadmin, and you already saw that one, but there's a few other roles in there. There's other things like credentials. You can store credentials and things. And then there's a few other things that are probably not as important right now. Server objects, this is where you'd have linked servers and triggers and some different things that we stored. Backup devices, replication, polybase, always on. I think I mentioned those earlier. Management, there's some stuff in here. If you need to mail out to your admins or something when events happen, you can do some stuff there. Integration services catalog is where your SSISDB is, and that's where all of your integration services projects and packages will be stored. And then finally, we're into the agent jobs. You have an activity monitor. So if I have jobs in here, I can actually double click this activity monitor and it will show me what's going on with all those jobs, when they're scheduled to run next, the last time they ran. So this sys policy purge history succeeded at 2:26 p.m. on the 3rd of October. So it hasn't run since then. The next run looks like it wants to happen. And that's probably because I had the agent turned off. It wants to happen tomorrow at 2 a.m. in the morning. And so you can also see that this SSIS server maintenance job is going to run at 12 a.m. in the morning next. You can right click on them, and you can also say view history, and it's going to give you a history of all the runs inside that agent. And then we can expand that just a little bit. You can see all the different steps of what happens, the step names. Click on those. At the bottom here, you get some extra information about it. So that's all of those. Another cool trick on here though is if you have jobs running and you want to see as they're getting done and everything, you can actually click the view refresh settings, and you can tell it to auto refresh every 60 seconds. Hit OK, and this view will refresh. So you can just have this sitting over here on one of your monitors, and you can monitor the jobs and see if anything fails. Then we have some alerting functionality. We have some operators, and those are the main two there. You have proxies and error logs also. Okay, so that's the main pieces of the Object Explorer. Now I want to move back to the query windows. And so let me get rid of some of these. We have too many up here. I don't need this alter anymore. Okay, so I'm back to just these queries here. Now there's some more things we can do with these results. So we know that we can just sit here and run by hitting F5 and we get two result sets. or we can highlight and get one result set. But sometimes you'll be running bigger queries, and you may need to find out what the query plan is and why it's running slow. So we have some more buttons up here. And so let's look at each of these buttons as we move through them. The first one I want to look at is include actual execution plan. So if I click that on and I execute it, we're going to see that we have a different tab show up down here, and it's the execution plan. So I'm going to click on it, and it shows you what the query had to go through. In this case, it's a small query. It does a full table scan. But if it hits indexes, if it does some unions and different things like that, you can see where it spends most of its time, and you can tune your queries. And so that's the actual execution plan. There's also this include live statistics. Let's click that and let's execute. Now we got another new tab down here, and the live statistics is similar, but if it was a long query, you would see this thing running in real time. Where the execution plan, this happens after the query is done. Now let's look at another button, include client statistics. Let's click that one and let's execute again. And we have another tab. And so this is your client statistics, and this tells you more about some of the stuff for tuning purposes. Also, you can also see if you're having network problems. So when you're trying to tune a query, you need to find out if the timing is because it's taking a long time for SQL Server to get the data, if it's taking a long time to transport the data. You need to find out where that timing problem is happening. And so these things here help you determine the actual issue. And so those are those buttons. I'm going to go ahead and click those back off and run, and you can see our tabs are gone. If you have a long query and you don't want to run it, you want to actually just check and see if the syntax is correct. So if I left out a from clause and I highlight this, first of all, you get the squiggly lines that tells you something's wrong. But you can also hit this parse query. So this parse just basically makes sure the query is correct. And it says incorrect syntax near DBO. Oh, we need a from clause. Put that in there. Then come back, execute again, and that's fine. Oh, sorry. And then hit the parse statement, and it just parses it successfully. That just tells you that your syntax is correct and that you don't have some kind of syntax error in there. So that's the parse. Now if we move over, this is to display the estimated execution plan. So if I click that, all I got was an estimated execution. So if you have a query that's running 30 minutes, you don't want to run it and then get the plan because it's taken so long. You want to find out the plan beforehand. And then you can change an index and see if it changes its estimated execution plan. Now the estimated execution plan might not be the exact same as the actual execution plan, but it's usually pretty similar. And so you can use that as an indicator, especially when you have a really long running query. And so that's the display estimated execution plan. We have some query options. And here you can change some different settings. Most of these I haven't had to deal with a lot. Some of this transaction isolation level, if you're dealing with inserts and things, you may have to deal with that. I don't do a lot of inserting data. I do a lot more of reading data, so or doing things in batch where I don't have to deal with those transaction logs and things. There's a lot of different settings right there. Your ANSI SQL settings, what your standards are. I don't usually mess with that. And then different results, how you want your results to come out. Which we will deal with here. And so those are those buttons, but those same buttons about your results are right here. And so what I want to do now is do the results to text. We've been doing results to grid. Let me rerun this. And we have a grid down here, right? Well, you also have results to text. If I click that and rerun this query, now you have a text results. And so we can change how the results come out. There's also this one here, results to file. If I execute that, then it lets you save the data as a RPT file. Cancel out. I'm going to go back to grid because that's the most common way. But one thing you can do, and happens quite often, is you want to copy your results to Excel. And so I have an Excel file here, and I'm going to copy the data into it. Let me make some room and minimize that, move that up just a little bit. Now what you need to know is that there's two different ways to copy this. If you can copy a row, which is fine, you can copy a cell, but if you click in this upper left hand up here, it selects everything that you have. And when I do that, now I can right click and I got two different main things that I usually interact with. One is you have a copy and you have a copy with headers. And usually I copy with headers, and that means that you're going to have the department name, department number, department name, and location with your results. So let's right click there and say copy with headers. Now if I go back to my Excel file and I just paste it in, where's my paste? Now I got the header and all the data. That happens quite often. When I'm checking data, I'll move it over to Excel to do some calculations and make sure some things are working, especially if you're doing like a moving average or some kind of calculation. You can go to Excel and make sure that calc worked right. Now we can look at the right click. I haven't even done that at all, but inside the query editor, we can actually right click and do some different things. So we have copy, cut, and paste. We have this thing called insert snippet. Now this is kind of cool. And so let's create a new query, and I can right click and I can say insert snippet. When I do that, you get this list of things that can help you start creating different objects. So if I want to create a new stored procedure, I can go in there to that folder and I can say create a basic stored procedure. And it gives you that procedure all filled out, ready to create your own. And you just come in here and change it to insert employee or something. And then you would add the parameter names that you want. And then you do some stuff. Right? So that's cool. So let's go back in, insert snippet. So now Control K, Control X will do the same thing. So if I hit Control K and then Control X, I get that same menu. And maybe this time I want to create a table, and it gives you the syntax for creating a table. All right, Control K, Control X, and I come in here and I want to create a different type of stored procedure. And this time we want a procedure with an output parameter. And now we have an output parameter. You can see it right there. And so there's a bunch of these, and we could go through all of them and look at them all, but it's something that you can do too. And it could be helpful. So I haven't used these a lot, and I don't know why I don't use them. I usually just start typing, but there are some different things in here that could be very helpful, you know, to get certain things started. So let's right click again. We have the surround with, so let's insert a snippet. Let's create, or actually let's just come here. If I highlight this, select from the department, and then I right click on my highlight and say surround with, now we get a couple of things. We can do a begin and end, or we can do like a while loop. I'm just double clicking on that and it's showing up, and now it surrounded my select statement with a while and begin and end. So that's cool too. We can also right click and we can change our connection. So we can change the connection on our query sheet. So if we want to go to a different server, maybe we're going from dev and we want to query against prod or something like that. There's this open server in Object Explorer. That's if you have the query open for a server and you don't actually have the server open in your Object Explorer yet. There's your execute again. We've been using the button up top, but you could do it here also. Here's all your estimated execution plan. You can disable Intellisense if you want. You can actually trace the query in SQL Profiler. We haven't talked about SQL Profiler yet, but we'll come back to that. We got the Database Engine Tuning Advisor. You can design the query in an editor. Let's hit that one. So now this is our department query actually designed in an editor. So it looks like Microsoft Access. We saw that when we were editing the view that a little bit earlier. And then here's your execution plans, query statistics, client statistics, same as the buttons that we had up top. You can change where your results go. And then you have your property window and your query options. And we've seen those things already. The property window is actually over here. One thing I haven't mentioned yet though is that you can hit these little bitty pin buttons. When you hit them, it hides things over to the side, and then you come hover back over or click back on them, and then they come back. And then if you click the little pin button, then they'll persist. Unclick it and it goes away. Now there's also, we talked about snippets, but there's also this thing called a template browser. And let's see what that thing is. So I'm just going to come over to View, and I'm going to hit the Template Explorer here, and I get this thing on the right hand side. Now this is very similar to that snippets that we looked at. And so over here we actually have things like create table and different things like that. So if I go into table, I have a whole bunch of things. Now this is much more verbose, has many more things to do. Like if you want to add a key, or let's say we want to add a column to the department table, right? What do we have in the department table right now? We just have these columns here. I'm going to come over back to my template browser. I'm going to pin it, and I'm going to say I want to add a column. Now these are really verbose with a lot of extra stuff in them. But there's a special combination of characters that you hit that helps you to fill this thing out. And it's Control, Shift, and M. Control, Shift, M. When you hit that, it goes to all those parameters that you're looking at, and it tries to give you the values. So in the database here, I'm actually working with SQL Training Online Simple DB, and the schema, and then we have the table. The table is employee, and the new column I want is email. And the type is not date time. I actually want a varchar, let's say 255. Okay, and it can be null. If I hit OK, now it went and inserted all this stuff for me. And I don't need all these little pieces. It does, if I look at the bottom again, we haven't done this for a while, I'm in SQL Training Online Simple DB. It tries to drop the table and recreate it. We definitely don't want that. So I'm just going to take all of that stuff, delete it, and just leave the add new column part. Alter table employee, add email varchar 255. Execute that. And now if we select back from it, where did my other tab go? It's over here. So that's a trick. It starts to hide all these things, but you have this little bitty arrow down here that will show you all of them. Or you can go to Object Explorer and click this little pin button, and it gives you more room. So back here though, if I go back and look at the employee table, well, I did the wrong, I was supposed to do department, wasn't I? Anyways, I added an email over here to the employee. And you can go through these, there's tons of them to help you start your queries, whatever you want to do. This little template browser will help you start it. Create table, you want to do that? Click that, and now you have a create table. Remember, Control Shift M helps you to fill out. You only have to fill them out. Just hit Control Shift M and then hit OK, and it'll simplify this to make it look more normal. But there's triggers, there's views, users. There's really a pretty robust group of things in here to help you with your SQL. You can even add your own templates. So if I right click and I say new folder, I can have a new folder and I can say my templates. And then from here, I can take a query. Let's see, hold on. First I want to do a new template. And so now I've got a new template and I'll just say select. And then I can edit this template. And what I want to do is go get, see if I can find my correct query. I got too many things open now. Let me minimize some stuff again. I just want to take my select from employee. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste it in. I'm going to save it. And now it's in the select there. So now I have my own template. If I double click it, it just opened a new query window for me with that select statement. Let me close up that template browser now. I'm going to close some of these windows. Get back to a manageable area, get my Object Explorer. Now let's move back to that profiler we talked about. Up here under Tools, there's this thing called SQL Server Profiler. So let's click on it, and it opens this new window that says SQL Server Profiler. Now this is a tool that's built in that allows you to see all the SQL queries that are being run right now on any database. And all we have to do is create a new trace and connect to the server, in this case the database engine's Joey desktop. Now you can also do it for analysis services, but we're working with the database engine right now. So we'll connect up, and it opens up this trace properties window, and there's a lot of different settings in here. You can capture a lot of different events. You can show all events, show all columns. You can filter columns so that you can only get certain databases and certain users you want to track. You can organize your columns where you want to get different things. You want to bring those in. And so if I click the show all events, now we see a bunch of different events in here that we could capture. And so there's a ton of things. You could do a full couple-hour video on the trace and how to use it to troubleshoot things. A lot of times I end up using the trace when, maybe there's a reporting services or Excel or a third-party tool that is hitting the database and slowing things down. We use the trace to figure out what queries are being run. And then you can find the query and then take that query and you can put it in your query window, and then you can see how the query plan is, if it's hitting indexes and stuff like that. In this case, we're not going to change anything. We're just going to take the general settings and hit run. And we can see everything that's hidden against this database. Now we have the report server right here that's doing some stuff. So reporting services is always doing stuff. And you can see it's moving on us. And then we also have this Joey. And I need to hit stop because it keeps moving on me. But we also have this Joey up here. And I'm hitting a database with SQL Server Management Studio, but I have multiple connections in here. And basically I have a connection with Object Explorer, and then I have a connection with my query windows, and that's all my connections. But you can see here, so let me clear this trace, and then I'm going to start it back up, and I'm going to run a query, and then we're going to see it. So let me hit start, and then I'll come over here and run select star from employee, execute. I'll switch back and hit stop. And right here, we can see that select star from employee was the query run, SQL batch was starting, select star from employee, SQL batch completed, and then there's how many reads it has and some different things in there. So this is a really good tool to know about if you ever need to troubleshoot some stuff. This is SQL Profiler. Now, as we're in here, there's a couple other things too. There's the tuning advisor. I'm not going to get into that today, but this Azure Data Studio, I want to open that. And so Azure Data Studio, oh, I don't want to start a tour, is another place that you can write queries. And if you're working outside of Windows, This is really a good option because this is built on Visual Studio Code. I'll probably start doing some videos here soon on this tool. But this allows you to run queries kind of like Management Studio. It just doesn't have as many features as Management Studio. And so I'm not going to get too deep into it, but it's something that's worth exploring. And then there's our snippets. You can check for updates if you see if you need an update for Management Studio. And then there's this options section. So the options settings, there's some settings that I always turn on, and I would probably recommend that you put them on also. And so let's get into those. Let me shrink them down. They're a little bit too big for my window here. So there's lots of different settings. You can customize all kinds of things inside of Management Studio, but there's specific ones that I think are probably good to point out. And the first one is fonts and colors. And when I click in here, there's different things that I have to set. For instance, let me see if I can move this out of the way for a minute. This grid down here, it's really small when I try to do trainings and things. And so I wanted to increase the font there. Well, in order to do that, I had to come in here, and there's a couple different things you have to do. You have to say show settings for, and there's different areas in here. The one that I had to get into were the grid results. And so on the grid results, I had to increase the size of the grid. And I could decrease it. Let's see what happens if I do that. So if I decrease it to 6 and I hit OK, let me rerun this. I might have to reopen the query window. Let me see if I have to open the query window. I have to reopen the whole Management Studio. Let me do that real quick. And so we're open again. Let me run this. And now you can see the results are super small and would be very hard for you guys to follow. So I'm going to set those back here in just a second. But let's go back to the options. And we'll go back to font and colors. And then we'll change the settings. So you would pick the different setting that you want to change, the size or whatever you want to change about it. I'm going to pick grid results. I'm going to change this back to 12. And we go to text editor. So this is where you're going to write your query. And it's going to work for all languages or different languages. So if I expand languages, there's all languages, but there's also different ones. If we click on the general in here, what I want to do is I want to enable the line numbers. That's super important. Whenever you're working online, whenever you're working with other people and you have to work remote like we do a lot right now, you have to point out different lines that people are on and talk about that line. Say like line 130 is where I see an issue. So line numbers are important and easier to work with people on. And also the word wrap is very important, I think. And there's a separate thing that says show visual glyphs, and let's see what that means. So I have my line numbers now, 1, 2, 3. And if we had a super duper long query, so let's open one of these views maybe. We'll script it out. This first line here, and let's make this smaller here. We'll make our screen a little smaller. Okay. So this line number 4 is now compiled of 3 lines because 5 starts here. But it's actually just wrapping. It's one long line. If we make it long out here, now we've got 2, but then it's wrapping, and then there's this little bitty thing on the right hand side that shows that it's wrapping. That's that visual glyph. I like it because it helps me understand what's wrapping and not. But the line numbers also help me understand if it's wrapping or not. You can see line 35 is also wrapping. So that's something that's good to turn on. Now there's one more thing in the options I want to show you. And let's get back out of here and go to let's go back to the environment, and let's look at the keyboard and query shortcuts. So there's times when in a lot of my videos I've done SP help, and SP help's a really cool thing that tells you more about the table when you're trying to develop and stuff like that. If you want to do SP help, it's Alt F1. and it tells you what it is. And then you've got SP who, SP lock, and then you can add some more in there if you want to. So let me show you this Alt F1. I just want to show you where these are at. But if I go back to my query, go to employee, hit Alt F1, it does SP help, and we got that small thing. I'm going to go ahead and reopen this again. Okay, so I have this open. I have it open again, and now if I do Alt F1, oops, highlight the element. If you've never done SP help, I have a video on it, but here's SP help, and then employee, and you've got the actual help information about that table. But if you go over it, you can do the Alt F1 and you get the same thing. So that was the SP help, and those were the shortcuts and the options. If you end up with a lot of different files, sometimes it's hard to organize them. So there's another thing in here that you can do inside of Management Studio, and that is a concept of projects. And so I can start a brand new project. And so I can say, it actually tried to create one, close the solution. I don't want to save it. Close solution, no. And what I want to do is a new project. And so now you can create SQL Server Script project. If you do that, you get a Solution Explorer over here. And this is kind of like what you'd have in Visual Studio. And in here you can put some of your connections in here. So if I do OK, I have a connection. That's my desktop, and you can add queries in here, new query, and then when you save them, they get saved into this project. So you can have a bunch of queries inside of one project. This is called SQL Server Scripts 2. If I sit there and save everything, I can close my project, or close the whole solution, and when I'm ready to work on it again, I can just come open project solution SQL Scripts 2, not 1, and there they are. And so now we have all those queries that we could work on. So that's the concept of solutions. Now I want to show you a couple of tips that can help you as you're working through and developing inside of Management Studio. So let me close this solution, because I don't need that anymore. Get rid of that. And what I need is a new query, but what I want to do first is I want to script out one of those views or something. So let's go ahead and take a view here and let's script it back out. What I want to show you, it's a really cool trick in here, and that is if I changed, like let's say I changed person from P to PER as my alias, that's going to mess up some things. But if I want to edit all these at once, all these P's right here, all you have to do is hold down your Alt button. So I start there, I hold down my Alt button, and I can drag vertically. Now I can type in PR, and I just changed all of those at once. So if you hold down Alt, you can actually select vertically and change things and type in for a full column. Sometimes you need to put commas in, all kinds of things where this vertical helps. Another trick is if I needed to decode a job, or let's say I need to decode this suffix, and I need to put a case statement in, but I forgot what the case statement syntax is. I can highlight that, and instead of hitting Alt F1 like we did with a table to get SP help, if we just hit F1, we end up with help statement from Microsoft. So here's the case statement. We can look and see the examples that they have. And they always have examples in there, like here's the case statement. And we can use that as a model for what we need to do. Here's another case statement. So if you just use F1 on whatever function you're working on, it goes directly to help. So this tip here that I'm going to show you is when you're working on a big query, a big long query. Let's see if we can find a view or something. Maybe let's go after a store procedure. So if we're working on a long store procedure and we need to divide it in half so we can see a certain part and keep a certain part of it steady. Let's go here. Maybe this is big. Yeah, this is big enough. So if we need to keep the procedure, we want to keep looking at these declared variables, I can come in here and I can split the screen. So I can keep my variables up there so I know what they are. And then I can scroll down here and I can change the code, but I can still see everything. So there's a lot of times where I have huge, 500 line views or something, and I need to keep part of it steady. And I'll do the split screen there so I can keep copying and pasting from one section down to the other section. For the next tip, we don't need these query windows anymore. We'll get rid of those. What we need is just to look over here inside the Object Explorer. And there's a feature that, I've quite frankly not used in a while, and I don't know why, because it's very useful. And so there's this, we've been working in the Object Explorer a lot. But if we go up to View, there's an Object Explorer Details. If I click on that, we get extra information over here in another screen. So this is not the query window, this is Details. And so let me click into one of these and click on Tables. And this is where I find it really nice, is we have all these different tables here, and it tells you a lot of stuff about them. The table, the schema, but you can right click on the column and you can grab row count. Now I can see how big these tables are without having to look through them. I can also right click and I can grab other information like data space used, and then you can drag them over. And I can grab stuff like index space used, and these are all important stuff. Let's get rid of policy, health. Now we can see index space. And so that's a really useful feature, especially the row count and the data space used. I think those are both really useful. When you get done with them though, you can reset the view back to where it was if you want, and then you can close down the Object Explorer. As you start working with a lot of different servers, you end up where you forget what the servers are. So you start keeping a list of them, or you start writing them down somewhere, forgetting about them. One other thing you can do that I haven't showed you yet is there's this whole concept of registered servers. So this is another window that you have. And in here, you can actually register the different connections that you have. You can right click on them and say you want a new server group. So you could get a group of dev servers, and you could have a group of production servers. So we say prod, and then we could have a group of staging servers, STG, and then inside of them you can have different server registrations. So this could be my actual server name, which is Joey Desktop. Down here, I can say this is prod, and you can give it a different name or whatever in the description. And then I don't have enough room here, and then you just hit OK. I gotta move it over here to do it. Save it, and it shows up over here. Now if I disconnect, I still have it up in my registered servers. Double click it, and now we have connected to it. And you can have multiples of these as many as you want. You can actually right click from here, and you can add them back up and say register, and we'll register as this as dev. Even though it's the same server, I registered it at 2 different times here. And you can put them into folders, you can move them around, but you can keep a list of a lot of different connections so that you can get back to them real easy just simply by double clicking on them. They're all there, they'll always stay there. If you look across the top here, you actually can have them for analysis services, reporting services, integration services too. So those are the registered servers. They can be helpful to keep track of all the different connections that you have. Now I'm going to close down the registered servers, and I want to show you, if you're on a database, there's a pretty cool feature. You can right click on the database and you can go to reports, and go to standard reports, and there's a bunch of different reports that just come with the database. The one I want to look at is disk usage by table. So if I click that, it's going to open up a report that gives me the record count, the reserve, the data, the same thing we just saw with the Object Explorer details. We're getting a report of that too. And so there's some different reports there that you can explore that help you understand what's going on with your database. And the last one I have here is when you create a connection. Let me first disconnect and let's reconnect. There are some advanced options in here. Now these advanced options, there's different things like connected database. I don't ever use that. There's some additional connection parameters if you need to put them in there. Don't ever use that really. But the one that's kind of interesting is this use custom color. So some people think that it's good to, when you like connect to a prod server, that you give a color to your tabs so you know you're in prod. So like we could pick this red color here and it says use custom color. If I hit connect now, you don't see anything special until I go in and create a new query, and now at the bottom I have red. And this helps you to know, well, I shouldn't delete out of here. I'm in prod. And then maybe your dev is green or your stage is yellow, but some kind of indicator that lets you know the different color or different state or different server that you're in, so that you don't do something silly in prod. So that's Management Studio. We just learned about connecting, we learned about different server types, disconnecting, Object Explorer, all the different objects and tables and views and stored procedures and the security, the GUI tools, the different ways to script things out, the different ways of saving your queries and projects. We learned about template browsers, and snippets, and profilers, and we had a whole bunch of tricks in there to help you along the way. So as always, if you find this helpful, please leave a comment below, click the like button, or subscribe to my channel. You can always visit me at SQLTrainOnline.com, or you can visit me on my LinkedIn channel, and I hope you enjoyed this video.